Of Matthias, the former Count of Oshelila, I would write nothing if I could, but that would rob many of their story, and Laria not the least of all. Her early life was a tale that took much for me to coax from her, and I doubt not she only told me half of it. Matthias brought her into this world, and her father's house scorned her for it. The life of a bastard child is not simply harsh, it is often cruel, but in Laria, Emma found a will of iron she could forge into a dangerous weapon. I have met many dangerous players of the great game, and Laria was born from far to be one of the best. The Diary of Princess Oshelila Ravenclaw, Countess of Oshelila. Chapter 2. Laria. Shuddering, Laria quickly twisted her head away from the gurgling, kicking man as the life drained from him. Snorting in disgust at his convulsions, the raven-haired noblewoman holding her captive pulled a dagger from the man's throat and tossed it on the table. Laria would have run if she could only break the bonds that bound her naked to a chair beside the casually discarded blade. The cell smelled close and cold, sound amplified by the rounded vault, making even a whisper feel like a shout. Blinking, to clear the cold sweat from her eyes, Laria could not help but watch the man's last convulsive moments with horrid fascination. She barely knew the man. Even weeks on the road had rendered little conversation and no real companionship. He was little more than a common thug, and no less of a pawn than she was in her former mistress's game. With a final shudder, Laria averted her eyes from the ruined man chained to the wall. Her fate would be no better. Gracing Laria with a dark smile, the raven-haired woman dipped her hands in a bowl of water and took a towel from the table to wipe the blood from them as she gracefully sat in a chair facing her. "Laria, that is truly your name, child?" the noblewoman asked crisply, gracing Laria with a thin smile. Laria swallowed and screwed up her face in terror at the ice-blue eyes regarding her. "Yes, Countess Emma," Laria replied quickly, working to avoid the gaze of the hard-faced noblewoman. Snorting a contemptuous laugh at the reaction, Emma selected a spoon-shaped knife from an ebony case at the table's edge. "Do you know what this is?" Emma whispered, slowly dragging the flat of the blade down Laria's tiny face. Shuddering at the blade's cold touch, her breath coming in quick gasps, Laria could only shake her head, earning a soft snigger from Emma. "No, few seldom do. It is for shelling an oyster, Laria, but I found, if you sharpen it further and reduce its size, it is wonderful for removing eyes," continued Emma, the smile draining from her face. The look of abject terror on Laria drew a sharp laugh from Emma, a dark and mirthless sound, as she placed the object on the table. "We are going to have a little chat, Laria, and you are going to tell me everything, as if your life depended on it, and it truly depends on it. Lie even once, and well, I think you understand the consequences," Emma crooned, her voice falling to a near whisper. Patting Laria's leg, she sat back in her chair and flashed her a cold smile. "Shall we begin?" Closing her eyes at the flat question, Laria nodded sharply. For what else could she do? "Gods, I'm a nobody," Laria grimaced, panic surging in her. "What in Alyssa's name do I have to give her?" she cried, praying to the goddess of love and mercy for a miracle. But Laria knew she had nothing to stave off the painful death she was all but certain would arrive before the hour was out. Opening her eyes, she lowered them immediately, unable to hold the gaze of the formidable woman. "Alyssa's mercy! Countess Emma Oshelila! I was better off as a house-slave," Laria screamed, the thought echoing around her head much like the sound did in this dank, vaulted space. Countess Emma, the subject of many a noblewoman's nightmares, sat regarding Laria for a long time. To say she was ruthless was the same as naming water as wet. Emma could probably frighten the tide into staying out, such was her reputation and that of her sister rulers of the Eastern Empire. "Tell me, Laria," Emma asked, leaning forward and tapping a brand high on her right arm, "how did you come to receive that? You have not long worn that brand by the looks of it," continued Emma, narrowing her eyes and pursing her lips at the angry red scar on Laria's arm. Puzzled, Laria frowned at the question. It was far from what she had expected. "I was a house-slave, my countess," Laria replied in a shaking voice. Ema just curled her lip in disgust at Laria's shaky-voiced reply. "Indeed, and one that ran away once before," Ema said, sounding strangely sympathetic, before snatching the towel from the table with a sigh to wipe the cold sweat from Laria's brow. "You were lucky they branded you and did not hang you, girl," Ema sniffed, sounding disgusted, and dropped the towel on the stone floor. "You do not need to tell me who did it. The brand tells me it was an Abvander. But which one?" Ema asked, frowning at Laria. Growling a little, despite the situation, Laria glanced up at Ema, a flash of hatred crossing her eyes. "Prince Owen's slave master branded me, at Princess Zirana's command," Laria hissed back, then swallowed hard when Ema just grunted at the heated reply and pursed her lips again. "So tell me, Laria, why the brand and not the rope?" Ema asked in an oddly soft and puzzled voice, considering the situation. Yet Laria simply slumped, missing the almost tender tone. Well, she slumped the best she could, with the harsh hemp bonds holding her in place. It had been a hard year since her indenture to House Abvander, and she felt used, abused, and tired to the very core of her being. But never in her darkest nightmares did Laria dream she would end up in Countess Ema's hands. Smoothing her face and employing a calming technique, Laria fought to regain what composure she could. "I wore a gold slave brand, and not the copper of a common slave, my Countess. Princess Zirana believed I would be of better service alive than a lesson to the other slaves," Laria explained, and closed her eyes in fright, losing what composure she had at the mask of naked anger that flashed through Ema's eyes. Picking up the sharpened spoon, Ema tapped it lightly against her hand, eyes of ice fixed firmly on Laria. "So, we come to the core of what I wish to know, child. You have done well thus far, but lie now, and you will wish they had hung you," Ema whispered in a deadly soft voice, then snorted at the sound of liquid dripping on the floor. "That never helps, Laria, yet you all do it," Ema snorted with an amused smile. Lowering her head in shame and eliciting a chuckle from Ema, Laria could only stare dejectedly at the floor as the sharp tang of urine rose to mingle with the smell of the blood from the dead man. "So, tell me, Laria, what task did the spider set for you? My niece is a canny player of the game, though she has much less care for the fate of her pawns than I do," continued Ema. Glancing up at the smiling woman, Laria shuddered at the cold look of contempt and quickly returned her gaze to the puddle of her own making spreading around the chair. The look on Ema's face could have frozen rivers and shattered stone. "I do not know, my Countess," Laria replied weakly. The slap she received from Ema snapped Laria's head to the side, dazing her. "One more lie, girl, and I'll take your right eye," Ema growled. Shaking her head to clear the stars, Laria drew a deep breath to calm the rising panic. "She is going to kill you, Laria. Gods, I have nothing to tell her to stop it," she cried, fighting away the terror, but it did little good with the brooding presence of the Countess so close. With great effort, Laria turned her eyes up to Ema, forcing calm onto her face. Ema just chuckled and patted her leg, noting the skills used by noblewomen in the great game to hide their emotions and true intentions. "You have had some instruction in the calming techniques to play the game, it would seem," Ema sniffed, gripping Laria by the chin and leaning in close, her face and eyes utterly devoid of any emotion. "But I am better at it than you are, girl. Now, answer my question. What has Zirana tasked you with?" Ema hissed, close to Laria's ear. Swallowing and fighting the urge to pee in terror, Laria tried to nod, but with Ema's hand gripping her chin, it was difficult. "Princess Zirana told me little, other than that I was to travel with that man to Oshelila. Once there, he would find me work through a contact in your household. That is all I know, my Countess. I swear it, on Alyssa's name," Laria squeaked in panic. Sniffing at the confession, Ema held her eyes for a while, then dropped her hand from Laria's chin. "Good girl. You see, the truth is much less painful, but be careful swearing to my goddess in front of me, child. I will stand no blasphemy in my presence," Ema said, leaning in and whispering in Laria's ear. Laria simply nodded rapidly, screwing up her face and swallowing hard, her face flushing with shame as her bladder finally let go again. "Yes, my Countess, I meant no disrespect," Laria replied, almost shouting it in fright. Ema simply grunted at the wet patter on the floor and settled back in her chair, absently tapping the sharpened spoon on the tabletop. "Tell me, Laria, what were you to do once you were in my employ?" Ema asked, eyes boring into Laria, who just shook her head, clearly terrified out of her wits. "I do not know, my Countess. I swear it. I was told nothing more," Laria replied, bracing for the expected beating or worse, and screwing her eyes shut. But after long moments when nothing came, she opened them to see Ema eyeing her with a crooked grin. "No, I truly doubt that not at all. Zirana is not that sloppy," Ema sniffed. Smoothing her dress, Ema regarded the slight girl tied to the chair. "So, tell me, Laria, which house sold you into servitude? You are not common-born, that is plainly obvious," Ema inquired, absently tapping the spoon on the tabletop again. The sound felt truly unnerving to Laria in the vaulted space. Trying to ignore the rhythmic tapping of the device that she was all but sure would end her life, Laria finally slumped in the chair. She had no will left. The weeks on the road and the harsh life as a slave had left her drained and frightened out of her wits. "House the elder, my Countess," Laria replied, her voice resigned to a painful fate, eliciting a snort of disgust from Ema as she tossed the spoon into the ebony case. "I gather you're one of Martin's children, the missing older girl by your name," Ema snarled, picking the dagger up from the table and leaning forward. "Oh gods, this is it. She has no more need for me," Laria grimaced, her mind screaming in panic. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes, unable to watch her last moments. Yet, when the inevitable did not come, Laria tentatively opened them in wonder as Ema cut the bonds from her hands. Sniffing at the confused look, Ema flashed her a smile and tossed the dagger back on the table. "I detest slavery, child, and like my wayward niece, I have a use for you, though you will earn my clemency, of that I can assure you," Ema said, patting Laria's leg as she stood and went to the cell door. Opening it just a little, Ema spoke in hushed tones to a man standing on the other side before returning to Laria. "Come, girl, let us clean you and feed you. Then we can have a long discussion about your new duties. Serve me well, and I will return your nobility. Fail me, and, well," continued Ema, glancing at the corpse chained to the wall with a dark smile, "I think you understand the consequences of that." Eyeing the corpse, Laria burst into tears, eliciting a deep sigh from Ema as she crouched beside her, taking Laria's hands. "I am not quite the monster people would have you believe, child, but I will be obeyed without question, Laria. Is that clear?" Ema said in an oddly tender voice, but Laria simply nodded sharply, keeping her eyes on the urine-damp floor. "What choice do I have?" Laria thought, lifting her eyes, puzzled at the soft face regarding her. It seemed discordant with the harsh, commanding Countess of only moments before. Pursing her lips, Ema regarded her for a moment. Laria was small, even for her age, her light brown hair sweat-plastered to her milk-pale skin, grey-green eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "How old are you?" Ema asked, brushing the sweat-damp hair back from her face. Pulling her emotions back under control, Laria gave Ema a tight, shy smile. "I saw my 17th name day last spring, Countess. I think father sold me, as no one wants a bastard child as a wife," Laria replied in a halting voice, still bamboozled at her escape from certain death. Frowning at the reply, Ema's smile turned sad at the admission. "So, you truly are Martin's illegitimate girl. That makes sense. I thought you dead or sold, but it would seem the latter was the case," Ema sighed, taking Laria's hands and pulling her to her feet. "I have a friend who owns an inn on land next to your father's holdings, so I will see that he thinks you are no longer among the living." Laria looked puzzled as Ema led her to the door and took an offered robe from the man behind it. "You are still technically a slave, Laria, but we keep none in Oshelila. I do not allow it in my province, but imperial law compels me to return you to your owner. So it is better for all that you are seen to vanish," Ema added with a significant look, and chuckled at the flash of understanding on Laria's face. "Come, you need to bathe," Ema continued crisply, ushering Laria out into the long, damp stone hall beyond. Closing the door on a sleeping Laria, Ema flashed her a tight, knowing smile at how quickly the issa root and milk poppy caused her to drift off. The girl was a complication in some respects, and in truth Emma should simply dispose of her, considering it was her husband's indiscretions that brought Laria into this world. But Emma felt indebted to the girl, and disgusted at her husband's actions. Laria was a political problem for Emma and her own family, yet while Emma was many things, and no less ruthless than any other in the great game, she was no murderer of an innocent, abused child. No, Laria was useful in her connection to the elder, along with her distant connection to the throne through House de Swain, and Emma would exploit that. Legitimacy meant little in the great game if one were determined enough, and Laria, bastard child or not, was still useful in the game, if only to bring her own husband down in time. Not that the girl knew it, but Laria had provided Emma with a wealth of information on Zirana's movements while Emma bathed her, and far more than torture alone could ever provide. With a tight smile, she shook her head at the man waiting in the corridor, and the dark, uncomfortable look he gave her as she joined him. "You disapprove of my methods in this case, Vern," Emma sighed, sounding tired and more than a little fed up. Vern simply regarded her for a moment, then shook his head. "Yes and no, sister. She's little more than a frightened child, and—" Vern tried to say, but Emma cut him off with a quick wave of her hand as she started toward her own apartments. "That girl is not even half as young as you think. Laria's just small for her age, and she was never any real danger, Vern. You should know me better than that," Emma replied curtly, and snorted in disgust at her brother. "Gods, Vern, when have you ever seen me actually torture a child? Oh, she received a slap for encouragement, but little else other than a fright," Emma sniffed, and eyed him for a moment. "Do not let that pretty little face fool you. That girl was raised in the rotting heart of the Empire, and she has seen much beyond her years. I can see that in her eyes," Emma continued, her tone stern and growing annoyed. Raising an eyebrow at the terse edge, Vern frowned at his sister, then sighed. "Sorry, Emma, you are right. I should trust you more. Yet, why the compassion? You do not have a habit of taking in strays, so who is she?" Vern asked, flicking Emma a questioning glance. Gracing him with a quick smile in return, Emma paused at the foot of the stairs that led toward her private wing. "Unlike the girl I have sent for, she is not of any immediate significance, just another pawn in my niece's current game. But she is the daughter of a house allied with the imperial throne, and a cousin to it, in point of fact, so useful in that respect," Emma replied, mounting the first few steps. Vern nodded as he leaned back on the balustrade, eyeing his slender sister before pushing her for more. "There are many cousins to the throne, Emma, so which house?" Vern asked, gracing Emma with a flat look that she snorted a laugh at and started up the stairs. "My, you are full of questions today, brother, but to answer them, she is one of Martin the Elder's girls, the eldest and illegitimate one, if you must know," Emma answered, in a voice no less flat than her look. Vern growled as he started up the stairs behind her, finally understanding who Laria was. "He sold her then. You should have forced Matthias to take her in when he confessed," Vern hissed, glancing back the way he had come. Emma simply nodded, a look of anger creasing her brow. "Yes, Vern, I should have, but it was complicated. And yes, that custom is in no danger of dying out any time soon in the Western courts. And danger is entrenched in their culture. Bah! The entire region is rotten to the core, and my husband is little better. You do not need to remind me, brother," Emma replied, her voice full of disgust, eliciting a growled response from Vern, his eyes focused on the polished stairs. "What do you intend to do with her? As much as I loathe the idea, you are legally bound to return her," Vern said tightly, causing Emma to pause and fix her brother with a hard smile. "And what in Alyssa's name would ever make you think I would do that? I owe that child a debt, as it were, in place of my husband. Most would dispose of the girl, and honestly, that would be the easier option. But I don't waste talent, and never an opportunity, Vern," Emma bit back, causing Vern to shake his head at the all-too-familiar warning of Emma's explosive temper coming to a boil. "So you do have plans for the little thing," Vern said. Curling her lip, Emma snorted in disgust and continued on her way. "What makes you think I would not? And besides, Vern, I said she was useful. But, if you must know, I will teach her and employ Laria as a lady's personal maid for now," Emma said, twitching her lips into a warm smile. That little thing, as you so aptly called her, is so grateful I have taken her in, and did not simply dispose of her, she will be utterly loyal to me. So, I plan to use her as the maid to the girl I have summoned to court. That way, I have a girl close that will spy for me without question, continued Emma. Pausing at the upper landing, she took her brother's hands and frowned at his questioning look. Watch them both, Vern. No harm can come to either, especially Issa, when she joins us. Little Laria will be given other duties in time, and Matthias will make good on his mistakes. But for now, she will be a maid and no more, Emma said firmly, holding Vern's eyes until his frown turned quite puzzled at her actions and sentiment. Issa? So, it is Sarah's daughter you summoned. Normally, I would not question your motives, sister, but why all the interest in these daughters of minor houses? Laria, as innocent as she seems, is a complication and an embarrassment to the elder and his wife's household. I seem to remember Lord Desvain was far from pleased when he found out what Matthias did, Vern replied, sounding at once confused and not a little angry at his sister. Providing Vern with a disgusted snort, Emma waved a dismissive hand and turned for the door at the end of the landing. My reasons, brother, you may not know. Just do as I bid you. And yes, it is Sarah's girl. Issa should have been here 2 years ago for her confirmation, but it seems Sarah has other plans. She still sulks on De Rivum estate, and I suspect it was to spite me. She will regret that, Emma snapped back. Grunting at the sharp response, Vern looked back down the stairs toward the lower corridor. What of the man? He did not survive your questioning, but that is not out of the ordinary, Vern asked, shifting the conversation to safer ground. Vern knew the look in Emma's eyes and the icy edge to her voice all too well. Pressing her further would not be wise, yet Emma just chuckled, cocking her head to the side at Vern's question, knowing full well her brother knew her moods and when to dig no further. Said with your usual understatement, brother, but he was little more than one of Zirana's messengers who made the fatal mistake of returning to my province. I would save the tears for the man. His past is unsavoury, to say the least, considering his connection to that rapist and murderer, Rhys de Goyer. But he was useful in what little he knew, Emma replied, gracing her brother with a knowing smile as she opened the door. It would seem 2 old friends will be paying a visit to my province, and I intend to keep Ravenclaw and his brother close this time. Flashing Vern a knowing smile, Emma went to close the door and paused as he held up a hand. What, Vern? I will discuss this no further, Emma hissed in a crisp and irritated voice. It is not that, Emma. One of the court pages turned up dead in the lower west wing. He looks to have been strangled, Vern explained with a worried look. Emma took a deep breath and shook her head at the pronouncement. Double the guard around my son's apartment and look into it. Since he was not stabbed, I doubt it was a court girl that did it, and I want to know what he saw that warranted his life. Have all in that tower questioned, because Thea's son lives in that tower, as well as my son, and gods, all I need is Tobias's death on my hands. As much as we are friends, Thea will turn on me if he is harmed in my house, replied Emma, and shoved the door closed with an angry growl. Letting go an uncomfortable sigh, Vern stood at the top of the stairs for a while, eyes narrowed in thought, before he returned down the way he had come. That is not the first court boy to die this year, and nor is it the first child to go missing in this house. But be careful, sister. If Issa is who I think she is, well, Ravenclaw will be less than pleased you never told him, and pray your past with his brother never catches up with you, or your own husband may see fit to dispose of you and your daughter. Awakened with a start at the sound of a door opening, it took Laria a moment to remember where she was and how she had come to be in the spacious apartment before the events of the previous night flooded back in. She still felt raw and exposed, but the kindness the Countess had shown utterly bamboozled her. You are far from the heartless monster the woman at court whisper you are, Emma. No, you play a more subtle game, Laria mused. While young and poorly trained in the art of the game, she was no one's fool. Laria understood quickly, as the Countess bathed her, that the torture session had not been one at all, but a blunt lesson in what disloyalty would bring. Emma, in that simple act, had shown how much of a master of the game she truly was. Laria understood now why those who worked for Emma did so with unwavering loyalty. It is not through fear, but through love? The revelation had shocked her, considering all the wild tales and sweat-inducing accounts whispered in the western courts where she had grown up. A young maid, placing a plain grey dress on a dressing stand, broke Laria's musings when she made a little whistle sound, appraising Laria's rooms with wide eyes. What did you do for the Countess to get chambers like these? Kalia will not be amused one bit that you have better chambers than her, the tall red-haired girl said in an amused tone. Casting her eyes around the room, Laria snorted at the comment. The room was well appointed, and a far cry from her slave cell back in Shăr, yet they were little better than what she had been used to growing up at court. Eyeing the lanky girl, Laria simply shrugged. She was a slim little stick, with light red hair and deep green eyes, marking her as Western Naxian, if a slight burr in her accent had not confirmed that already. Who are you, and who is this Kalia? Laria asked in a cold, slow, flat voice that obviously startled the girl by the flash of fright that crossed her face. Rolling her eyes, Laria sat up in bed and placed her feet on the floor. Sorry. Let us start all of this again. Laria sighed, doing her best to sound pleasant. Honestly, she felt far from the mood to be social at all, and frankly had little time for anyone. Laria simply wanted to sleep after weeks on the road and the fear of death in Emma's dungeon. Flashing a quick smile at the forced pleasant tone, the girl made her way to the side of the bed. I am Tila, Tila said, and sat on the edge of the bed next to Laria. The bold action caused Laria to smile at the girl in return. This close, she could tell the girl was no older than 12 or 13, despite her height. Well, I am Laria, Laria said, offering her hand to Tila, who laughed and took it. I know. My aunt told me your name this morning when assigning tasks, Tila replied, casting her eyes around the room again, obviously impressed at Laria's chambers. Gods, Kalia will be annoyed at this, I can tell you that for nothing, continued Tila, sounding genuinely concerned about Kalia's opinion. Frowning at Tila's concern, Laria pushed the sheet away as she stood. She still felt a little shaky from the night before and the flight through the city when the guards had chased her down and the man she arrived with. Who is this Kalia you keep mentioning? And I gather that dress is for me, Laria asked, pointing at the garment, prompting Tila to give her a startled look and quickly gain her feet. Yes, Aunt Rhea told me to give you that, and that you are to present yourself to the Countess before mid-morning prayers, Tila said quickly. Laria simply grunted and snatched the garment from the dressing stand before ducking behind a changing screen. She had no traffic with the gods, and frankly thought all the bowing and scraping to imaginary beings a little silly, to be honest. Still, I am in Emma's house, and best I follow her custom. So, who is this Kalia? Laria asked, shrugging off her night dress, causing Tila to chuckle at the question and earning a little smile from Laria. The girl had an infectious and cheerful demeanour about her that oddly put Laria at ease. She had not felt this way in so long that it felt dissonant against the months of fear and uncertainty since her father had sold her into servitude. Oh, she is my cousin and self-appointed head of maids, Tila said, causing Laria to roll her eyes as he wriggled into the plain woolen dress. And why would she be so upset about my room? I have to sleep somewhere, Tila, and besides, it is not like I chose them. It was the Countess who put me here, Laria replied, popping her head around the screen and shrugging at the girl's answer. Tila just chuckled again. She really was an unflappable thing, Laria thought absently. Housemaids don't get rooms like these, or in this wing, Laria. Kalia thinks she is all that because her family has an apartment in the southern tower. God knows why, since it overlooks the execution yard. And Tila shuddered before cocking her head at the wide canopied bed. Laria just shrugged again, busy looking around for her stockings and shoes. Biting her lip, Tila rolled her eyes and pointed at 2 bags on a chair by the door, understanding what Laria was seeking. Sorry, I was supposed to tell you those were there, Tila confessed, sounding slightly embarrassed. With yet another eye roll of her own for the girl, Laria fetched the bags and dumped the contents out on the bed. So, I have a better room in the palace than she does. What is the big deal? Laria asked, slipping her stockings on. Sniggering at the comment, Tila set about making the bed, eliciting raised eyebrows from Laria. You are in the family guest wing, Laria. Only the Countess's family and ladies of the court get these rooms, and very few court girls get one so large. My family has apartments in the western wing, because my father is the master of the smithy, but the rest of the maids have rooms under Carlia's family, if they are not assigned to a lord or a lady of the court," Tila explained, stopping only long enough to grace Laria with a significant look. Snorting in understanding, Laria grimaced a little at the explanation. Tila was far from stupid despite her age. There was a pecking order, and Laria would be disrupting it. Having finished pulling her shoes on over her stockings, Laria folded her arms, a dark smile blooming on her face. Her rooms were far from her doing, and now she had them, and she would not let some self-appointed twit chase her from them. "I have dealt with court girls like your cousin, and she will just be another jumped-up little twerp that I will need to slap at some point," Laria snarled, flashing the girl a hard smile. Tila gave her a wide-eyed stare, then burst out laughing. "I do hope so. She is honestly awful to all of us, but she has to be careful with me. My father holds a higher rank than her parents do in court, and I am to be a lady's personal maid," replied Tila with a mischievous grin. "But that is not the worst of it. Auntie says you are not a common housemaid either, but a personal one to a new lady coming to court. So Carlia has no say in where you go or what you do. Personal maids answer only to their lady and the countess," continued Tila. Shrugging at the comment and adjusting her dress, Laria absently went searching for her dagger before realizing she no longer had one. "That is a situation I need to solve," Laria grimaced. She felt naked without one. The months spent living as a house slave reinforced a multitude of reasons why a girl needed one. Not that a slave was allowed to have a dagger, of course, but as a court girl in the West, it was a required tool if one were to keep their virtue from the men and their lives from the woman. "So what? I'm still a maid, Tila, and I just get to look after some snooty noble brat hand and foot all day," Laria said offhandedly, causing Tila's eyes to grow wide at the over-blunt statement. "I would be very careful who hears such talk, Laria. Auntie would switch you till Dashes Day and beyond if she heard that," Tila replied. Laria just snorted at the comment, her head cocked to the side. "Believe me, Tila, I've had much worse. Now, where can I find breakfast?" Laria shrugged, picking up her belt purse and frowning at the extra weight. Her confusion was not that surprising, since it was empty when she arrived in Oshelila. The Countess, it would seem, had added some coins to it, and not a little when Laria gave the gold and silver in it a startled look. Rolling her eyes, Tila put an arm around Laria and guided her toward the door. "Just be careful. This is Countess Emma's court, Laria, and she would switch you herself if you displayed bad manners to the ladies. I would be a terrible friend if I did not warn you," Tila confessed. Pulling Tila to a stop, Laria gave the girl a puzzled look at her easy use of the word. Friends were something she never really had. "We are friends?" she asked Tila in an amused tone, receiving a sharp nod in reply. "Of course we are," Tila replied in an earnest voice. "And we get paid to work, Laria. We are not slaves, you know." Tila sniffed, inclining her head at Laria's purse and pulling her through the door. Laria simply chuckled as they entered the corridor. Tentatively entering Countess Emma's private office, Laria curtsied to the formidable woman when Emma glanced up, a slight smile on her lips. "Sit," was all Emma said, returning her attention to a document she was reading and waving Laria toward a couch. Quickly finding a seat, Laria sat with no small amount of trepidation clouding her thoughts. The woman still frightened Laria more than a little, and well, she should, given Emma's reputation. Yet the events of the previous night also gave Laria much to ponder, considering the care the woman had given her after their little chat. Little chat? It was a blunt lesson in loyalty to me. Step out of line, and the consequences will be quite painful, if not fatal. But, on the other hand, if I am loyal, wealth and position will be granted. Laria was nobody's fool. She understood she still breathed because she was useful to this woman. Keep that in mind, Laria. Emma has her reputation for a reason. Emma's focus on her work afforded Laria time to observe the Countess in a way she had not been in a clear enough mind to do at their first frightening meeting. The woman was stunning, to say the least. Long raven dark hair, held loosely with a simple silver clasp, framed a face with piercing blue eyes and delicate features. "Gods, the woman looks no older than I am, but she must be 40 or more summers," Laria mused, noting Emma was not simply pretty, or indeed beautiful. She held a timeless beauty that puzzled her. Glancing up from the parchment, Emma narrowed her eyes as if she had heard Laria's thoughts, smiled, then dropped the document on the desk. "I trust you slept well, dear?" Emma asked, pushing her chair back and standing, prompting Laria to stand quickly and curtsy, earning an approving nod from the woman. Moving around the desk, she waved Laria back into her seat and joined her on the couch. "I did, my Countess," Laria replied, with only the faintest hint of worry in her voice. Noting it, Emma chuckled and took her hand. "Most would miss your worry, Laria. I, on the other hand, hear it as clear as a bell ringing," Emma said, squeezing her hand with a little knowing smile at Laria's wide eyes. "Measure your words before you speak, and see them as you wish them to sound. But above all, learn to breathe slowly and calmly, no matter the gravity of the situation," continued Emma. Laria could not help but smile at the woman. Emma had just begun to teach her the art of the game. "Thank you, Countess. I will do my best," Laria answered, earning a raised eyebrow from Emma. "No, Laria, you will do better than that. I expect no less. You are to be in my office every other afternoon for instruction. Am I clear?" Emma snapped, causing Laria to flinch and nod. What else could she do but comply? "Good," Emma said in response, her voice softening. "Now, to your duties. I gather you would like to know what they are." Laria lifted her eyes to the woman's gaze and quickly dropped them, receiving a faint hiss from Emma. Laria felt she could never hold this woman's gaze for long. "That is another habit to work on, dear. Your eyes hold your emotions clear for all to see. Learning how to hide them so others may not read them will take you time," Emma said, patting her hand. "Sorry, Countess," Laria whispered, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. Smiling at the reply, Emma lifted Laria's chin with a finger so she could see her eyes. "Do not be afraid to look me in the eye, Laria. I prefer honesty and strength over simple obedience, although I require both from my agents," Emma smiled. Laria widened her eyes a little at the Countess's statement, receiving a little snort from the woman. "Yes, Laria, you will be more than a simple maid to me. I just require you to look after Lady Issa's needs to begin with. You are to be my eyes and ears on the girl when she arrives at court, and nothing more for now. There are things I wish to know, that is all," continued Emma, standing and returning to her desk once Laria gave her a sharp nod in compliance. "Make sure it is you who dresses Issa to begin with. There is something I wish confirmed. You will know what it is when you see it. I also require you to search her belongings. If I am correct, she will own a certain ring. Do not take it, Laria. I simply wish to know if she still has it," Emma commanded. Puzzled by the slightly cryptic orders, Laria went to ask more, but halted when Emma snorted and waved a dismissive hand at her questioning look. "When you control your own network, dear, you will find it is best to give only a sketch to your agents. In that way, they will return not just what you want to know, but things you did not think you needed to know. The game is more than just controlling emotions and maintaining composure, girl. It is a strategy not unlike that required in directing an army," Emma said crisply, earning a warm smile from Laria. Emma did indeed intend to teach her, and the lessons had already begun. Seating herself at her desk, Emma picked up a pen and wrote on the document she had been reading as Laria entered. "You are dismissed for today, dear, but before you go, I have one more task for you," Emma said, pulling Laria up short in her curtsy to the Countess with a puzzled expression. "Yes, Countess?" Laria replied, her voice questioning, earning a snort from Emma at her confusion as she signed the bottom of the document before sealing it with wax and pressing her signet ring into it. Adding her signature to the sealed letter, Emma pursed her lips and lifted her eyes to Laria. "Observe the other maids and pick one or two to be your confidants. You need to learn to build your own network, dear, subordinate to mine, of course, and that is a good place to start, in my estimation. Should you run into issues with Rhea or any of my court ladies, give them this," Emma said, sliding the document over the desk toward Laria, who quickly curtsied and picked it up. "Do not open it. Just hand it to them. What is inside will curtail any objections to your work now and in the future," continued Emma, as Laria turned the parchment around in her hand, pursing her lips. "If you must know, it is a writ of passage I give to my secret police, which no one in this citadel will question. As for the maids, tell those you choose I will see them receive rank in court for their obedience and loyalty," Emma explained. Narrowing her eyes and tapping the document against her hand, Laria bit her lip and nodded. "I have one in mind already, Countess. Tila Smitherson," Laria said firmly, but Emma just chuckled and pointed at the door. Then go recruit your first agent, dear. If you manage to curb little Tila's chattering, you will be well on your way to learning the game, Emma said, sounding thoroughly amused at Laria's choice. Dropping a curtsy, Laria left Emma's office with a broad smile. Curb it? I intend to use it, Countess, Laria sniffed, pausing only to grace Byrne with a puzzled frown at his knowing smile before she all but dashed from the Countess's private space.